Election coming up on August the 10th is nothing like what is being experienced in Guyana after their election on March the 2nd, because the Caribbean Court of Justice, we're just a day away from their ruling in relation to those polls. Maybe we'll find out if they can rule, if they cannot rule, if they will rule based on the objections raised by the opposition PPP Civic. Well, TV6 Morning Edition has featured interviews from both sides of the primarily political divide in Guyana to get a greater understanding of what is happening. I think it's important for us to understand, because these are our Caribbean neighbors. And indeed, as we say over and over again, there are thousands and thousands of either Guyanese or those with interests in Guyana who want to know what is happening in relation to the elections of March the 2nd. The opposition People's Progressive Party Civic is hoping for a ruling in their favor come tomorrow. Well, we're joined now by Bishop Juan Edghill, a former junior finance minister, as the PPPC wants to respond and clear the air on allegations made by the APNU-AFC on this program. Of course, we had Representative Mr. Norton up to yesterday. Mr. Kemraj Ramratan spoke last week as well. So, Bishop Edghill, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. What issues would you like to clarify first and foremost?
Well, good morning, and let me say greetings to all your viewers and listeners. The very first thing that I think needs to be made known is that every time we talk about the elections, we are talking about the elections of March 2nd, 2020. It's only one election, and it was the same set of ballots, 2,339 boxes, that the David Granger administration was prepared to be sworn in for a second term on, as a result of a fictitious and fraudulent declaration by Mr. Clement Mingo, the returning officer for District 4, that they're now seeking to discredit, because the recount has shown and has clearly demonstrated that the PPPC has won these elections by 15,416 votes. All of the other sideshows, the circus, the narratives, is evidence of desperation on the part of sore losers who are not prepared to relinquish power. So that's the first thing I would like to establish. The results on March 2nd show the PPPC won these elections. The recount has shown and confirmed that they won these elections. The sideshows are on the road.
All right, just let's clarify that particular. I'm glad we're compartmentalizing everything in the way that you are. Mr. Norton, on behalf of the APNU-AFC, said, and based on my understanding of what he explained, is that one, there is a count, then there is the recount, as happened concluded just a couple of weeks ago, but then the votes are still to be verified, and that's why he justified the decision by the CEO, Keith Lowenfield, for removing 115,000 votes, saying that yes, the votes are cast, but then it has to be valid votes, which means that there has to be a verification process after the count and after the recount. What say you to that?
Well, Mr. Norton and his gang are people who practice politics without morality. They are people who suffer from selective amnesia. They are intellectually dishonest. The reality is, a recount is simply counting again the votes that were already counted. The votes were counted. Statements of polls were produced. The PNC is the only party who have not displayed publicly their statements of poll, because they sided and procured the services of a District 4 returning officer to declare fraudulent results. It is as a result of those fraudulent results that we went again into the 2,339 ballot boxes and counted over the votes. The numbers from the recount matches that of the original count. The only fraud that is in these elections is the declaration of Mr. Clement Mingo, and now the attempted fraud of the chief elections officer to invalidate 115,000 votes to give the APNU AFC a victory. That's the only fraud.
So how then, Bishop Edghill, did the High Court in Guyana, and correct me if I'm wrong, how did the High Court rule by majority 2-1 in favor of the claim of Miss Eslyn David?
Well, it would not be correct to say the High Court ruled in that manner. Miss Eslyn David went to the Court of Appeal, not the High Court, the Court of Appeal in Guyana, seeking several orders. All of those orders were denied. But the Court of Appeal interpreted more votes cast to mean more valid votes cast. That's the only ruling, and that is what is being challenged at the CCJ, because Mr. Lowenfield, since the Court of Appeal ruled more votes cast must be interpreted to mean more valid votes cast, sought to invalidate 115,000 votes because poll books and documents which are in GCOM's possession that was not produced at the time of the recount was not examined. And once a box, the poll book was not present or a list was not present, Mr. Lowenfield is attempting to discredit all the votes in that box to produce an outcome that Mr. Mingo did not succeed in getting done on March 4th, 5th, and March 13th. That is a fraudulent declaration. So they're seeking to use the decision of the Court of Appeal, more valid votes. But the PPPC and all of us in Guyana agree that the only votes that could be counted to declare a president or the winner of an election are valid votes. Invalid votes are not counted. At the time of the count, invalid votes, which are votes that are not properly marked, votes that are marked for more than one party, votes that don't have a 6-digit stamp, those are all votes that are rejected. They are removed from the bundle and they are put into what is called a rejected pile. It is only valid votes that are cast. So,
and therefore, Bishop Edghill, if you allow me to ask the question, because the CCJ meeting tomorrow, are you expecting the CCJ first and foremost to actually confirm that they have the jurisdiction to rule? Because there's been this argument by the AP and UAFC that they don't have the jurisdiction. We saw ads in a newspaper in Trinidad and Tobago essentially saying that over the weekend. Do you expect the CCJ to, 1, rule on the matter, and 2, rule in your favor?
Well, first of all, we expect the CCJ to rule that they do have jurisdiction to hear the case, because the matter that is before the CCJ is a very narrow matter. It is when the PNC-led APNU AFC went to the Court of Appeal claiming exclusivity and finality under Article 177(4) of our Constitution. But in that article, the only time the Court of Appeal could be the court of original jurisdiction and not the High Court is if you're inquiring about the qualifications of the president. But there has been no declared and elected president. So that application was even premature. And the Court of Appeal, we believe, wrongly assumed jurisdiction, even though they have not granted the orders that were sought by Eslyn David. They made this entry into the arena of including in their decision, more votes cast means more valid votes cast. And that is what is at the CCJ right now. But for us in Guyana and in the PPPC, whatever is the ruling of the CCJ, the matter must return to the Guyana Elections Commission, where the Elections Commission must be able to declare who won the elections and the president. And that declaration will be made based upon the results of the recount, because the chairman of GCOM has already written to the chief elections officer to prepare the final numbers, which means numbers of seats allocated in National Assembly and number of seats in the 10 administrative regions based upon the tabulated numbers of the recount. It is Mr. Lowenfield who is trying to use the Court of Appeals ruling to invalidate 115,000 votes to give the incumbent a second term when they have lost the election by 15,416 votes. So all that is happening is a narrative that is being presented to create an impression like if there's a confusion, but there is no confusion.
And Bishop
Elections are won based on numbers.
And Bishop Edghill, if you allow me to, because again, what we're trying to do here on Morning Edition in Trinidad and Tobago is to clear up a lot of misconceptions or indeed clarify or reinforce particular issues. Yesterday, we heard from Mr. Norton allegations of either the stuffing of ballot boxes, dead people voting, non-existent people voting, some ballot boxes with no required documentation being allowed. Those allegations are being made by the incumbents and benefiting the PPP Civic. That is the claim being made.
Yes, I am aware of that because I was one of the counting agents during the time of the recount for District 4, which was the contentious district. The PNC, APNU, AFC activists came to that room with exactly what you call allegations. No evidence, unsubstantiated. It was what you call a fishing expedition. They were just looking to find something to create an impression that something is wrong with these elections. But it was the same boxes with the same numbers. They were claiming victory for Mr. Granger Witt. Because they can't change the numbers, they are seeking to create a narrative that something is wrong with the boxes. Well, all the poll books, all the envelopes, with all the lists and the folio and everything, they have video footage of the presiding officers handing them into the returning officer at GCOM's compound. Why during the recount, GCOM did not make those documents available? Deputy returning officers came forward and told the people that it was the returning officer, Mr. Clement Mingo, and his staff who gave instructions that certain documents must not be placed in the ballot box, but should be submitted to the returning officer. There have been no investigation by GCOM, Mr. Lowenfield. There have been no investigation by any authority within GCOM to produce those documents. But the PNC, APNU, AFC, is using those allegations as a way of seeking to discredit their vote count. But there is the CARICOM report. The 3 scrutineers from CARICOM spent 40-something days in Guyana, 33 days watching the recount day by day, and they wrote a report. And they said even if those allegations have any merit, the place for those allegations is in an election court by way of an election petition. But they don't want to go to an election court with an election petition. They first wanted to nullify these elections, discredit these elections, because they realized that their fraud that they were hoping to use to get into office was exposed by the PPPC. So that is why I said they're practicing politics without morality. They continue to lie, mislead, and misinform. And Mr. Norton is just one of those mouthpieces among several of a small group that is seeking to mount that narrative to bring confusion in the minds of the people. It's the same votes, the same elections that they were hoping to be sworn in with, that they're now seeking to discredit.
We have just about 4 minutes left, Bishop Edghill, and we appreciate you offering us the perspective from the PPP Civic. Yesterday, Mr. Norton didn't seem disinclined towards the idea of another general election being held and basically invalidating what would have happened on March the 2nd. What is your position as a member of the PPP Civic? Are you inclined towards another general election?
We don't think there is need for another general elections. We believe there needs to be a conclusion of the March 2nd, 2020 elections. The people have voted. The votes have been counted. The votes have been recounted. It's time for a declaration, the swearing in of the next president, the forming of the next cabinet, the convening of the next parliament, and getting the people's business moving. Not because you're a sore loser. And that's what Mr. Norton and the PNC-led APNU-AFC are. They are sore losers. They claimed victory. When they realized that their fraud was exposed, they then moved to the point of, let's nullify the elections and let's have new elections. The recount has shown that the PPPC has won these elections. It's time for the election process to be concluded by way of GCOM, the only authorized authority to make the declaration. GCOM has no authority to nullify an election. The only way an election could be vitiated is after an elections petition in an elections court where all the evidence have been properly adjudicated and a determination has been made. And that is when an elections could be nullified. So right now, what is needed is a declaration and get the country moving. And the PNC-led APNU-AFC should stop stonewalling and holding the country at ransom because they don't want to relinquish power. It's time for them to concede that they have lost the elections. It's time for them to behave as Democrats, and it's time for them to be truthful with their own supporters. Isn't it strange that the only group that is not mouthing that narrative is the PNC-led APNU-AFC? Every other organization, every international body, every foreign government, every major organization is seeing things for what it's worth. The CARICOM, the OAS, the Commonwealth, the United Nations, the Carter Center, the Americans, the British, the Canadians, the European Union. Everybody is seeing it for what it's worth. It's only a small group of people who don't want to relinquish power because they have been benefiting for themselves, their family, and their cronies, and squandering the public purse. But that needs to come to an end and let the electoral process be concluded by.
And before we conclude, Bishop Edghill, and we do appreciate you taking the time to offer that perspective, are you confident that that is going to happen following tomorrow's ruling, whatever the ruling may be, of the CCJ? Because this has gone on now for more than 3 months. So before we conclude in a minute's time.
4 months, sir.
Sorry, 4 months. Thanks for the correction. So before we conclude in a minute's time, are you confident that that declaration will come in the not too distant future?
Yes, the hard truth is when the CCJ makes their ruling tomorrow, whichever way it goes, the next step is that the Guyana Elections Commission needs to meet, get the declaration done, and the next president sworn in. That is the logical conclusion of this matter. Any other route would be undemocratic, illegal, unlawful, and unconstitutional, and it would be the bullies in the street seeking to stop a democratic process. And as Guyanese, we will not allow that to happen.
Bishop Juan Edghill, thank you very much for taking the time, sir, to speak with us.